Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the life of a figure who didn't just build an empire, he literally drafted the blueprint for modern statecraft. We're talking about Cyrus the Great, and we'll see exactly how he managed to turn a bunch of scattered kingdoms into a unified global superstate. Okay, so let's jump right into this massive historical puzzle. How exactly do you rule millions of diverse subjects across the ancient world without, constantly terrorizing them? Conquerors back then almost always relied on sheer brutality. But Cyrus? He took a wildly different approach to building what would become the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. To understand how he did it, we first have to grasp the sheer scale of the whole thing. His domain was so incredibly vast that it actually required 4 separate capitals just to govern it all: Pasargadae, Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana. I mean, managing a single capital in the ancient world was a nightmare on its own, but coordinating 4 distinct nerve centers across thousands of miles, that requires some absolute administrative genius. Part 1. The first superpower, from Anshan to empire. So Cyrus actually started out as this relatively obscure king of Anshan, which was just a small vassal state. But he didn't just win a couple battles to break free. No, he completely redrew the map. He forged the Achaemenid Empire, which was the world's first true multi-state empire. He managed to unite dozens of different countries, religions, and languages, all under one central administration. It was just a completely revolutionary way of organizing humanity. Part 2. Rise of the Conqueror, the momentum of war. Think about the relentless pace of his expansion for a second. In 550 BC, he overthrows his own grandfather to take the Median Empire. Just 4 years later, he pushes west and takes Lydia. And then, by 539 BC, he achieves the absolute unthinkable by conquering the mighty Neo-Babylonian Empire. This wasn't a slow, gradual creep. This was a total geopolitical earthquake, all packed into a single decade. Now, here is where it gets really fascinating. To win these impossible fights, Cyrus relied heavily on battlefield innovation. Right before the Battle of Thimbra, one of his advisors suggested a pretty wild tactic: putting baggage dromedary camels right on the front lines. The opposing Lydian horses were so completely spooked by the unfamiliar smell of the camels that they just panicked. The enemy cavalry was easily routed. It's an absolute masterclass in psychological and sensory warfare. Part 3. The Fall of Babylon, Engineering a Conquest. So instead of grinding his army against Babylon's famously unbreakable walls in some horrific drawn-out siege, Cyrus's engineers pulled off basically the ultimate ancient heist. They literally dug a canal to divert the mighty Euphrates River, dropping the water level down to about the height of a man's thigh. And then, under the cover of night, his troops marched straight down the riverbed and slipped directly into this unconquerable city with almost zero resistance. But here is the real kicker. Immediately after pulling off this incredibly cunning military victory, he doesn't just burn the city to the ground. Instead, he issues the famous Cyrus Cylinder. He officially establishes himself as a benevolent liberator rather than a cruel conqueror, actually funding the restoration of local shrines and sending displaced peoples back to their homelands. It's an act of tolerance so profound that the UN actually recognizes it today as an ancient declaration of human rights. Part 4. A new kind of ruler, governing the impossible. To actually manage an empire of this impossible scale, he essentially had to invent modern statecraft. He created the satrapy system to give regions autonomy, letting local governors run their specific areas. To tie it all together, he built this innovative postal relay system called the chaparkhana. He standardized the entire economy with a lighter gold coin, the cruzide, to boost trade across his massive population. He even invested heavily in public beauty, designing these magnificent walled botanical gardens called the Paradisia, which basically served as the blueprint for parks everywhere. This was a complete, mind-blowing paradigm shift in governance. Think about it. Previous warlords, like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they ruled entirely through fear, deporting populations, enslaving their enemies, and actively destroying local religious temples. Cyrus, on the other hand, engineered a rule of hope. He conquered through integration. He actually allowed regional autonomy, and he paid out of his own pocket to rebuild his subjects' local shrines. And this unprecedented religious freedom had massive historical ramifications. Because of this exact policy, he liberated the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. He allowed them to return to Judah and rebuild the Second Temple in Jerusalem. In fact, because he facilitated this, Cyrus is explicitly designated with the title of Messiah in the book of Isaiah. He's literally the only non-Jewish figure in the entire Hebrew Bible to hold that profound honor. Moving to part 5, the mystery of his death, conflicting ancient accounts. Well, history is rarely completely tidy, right? One perspective, which comes from the ancient Greek historian Xenophon, tells us that Cyrus didn't actually die violently at all. According to him, he passed away peacefully in his bed in his majestic capital of Pasargadae, gracefully passing the torch of the empire down to his sons. Honestly, it's a very fitting, dignified end for a master architect of statecraft. But then you have Herodotus, who tells a brutally different tale. He claims Cyrus actually died fighting a nomadic tribal confederation called the Massagetae. The story goes that after Cyrus tricked and defeated part of their army, which led to the suicide of the opposing queen's son, Queen Thamyris swore absolute vengeance. In a massive, fierce battle, Cyrus was killed, and Thamyris ordered his head to be dipped in a vessel of blood to avenge her son. It's a pretty shocking reminder of the brutal realities and fierce rivalries of ancient warfare. Finally, part 6, an enduring global legacy echoes through time. Regardless of how he ultimately met his end, the legacy he left behind is absolutely staggering. He was so deeply revered for his protection of diverse peoples that prominent 19th century scholars have actually theorized that Cyrus is eternally immortalized in Islamic scripture as Di-Okonain, a righteous, powerful figure noted for erecting a barrier to protect troubled people. His philosophy of a multicultural, highly tolerant superstate literally shaped the foundations of modern governance. I mean, Alexander the Great deeply admired and emulated him. Thomas Jefferson's drafting of the U.S. Declaration of Independence was heavily inspired by accounts of his life. The UN recognizes his cylinder as an ancient human rights text. And perhaps most remarkably, as the Greeks themselves recorded, he was revered with the title of the Father by the very people he had actually conquered. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Over 2.5 millennia ago, Cyrus the Great proved beyond a doubt that you could build the world's most successful society not through terror, but through tolerance and integration. So, if an ancient conqueror could achieve that way back then, why do modern leaders so often rely on division and fear today? Thanks for joining me on this one, and keep asking those big questions.